Happy New Year. I'm Thomas Hare, the Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry are scheduled twice monthly and represent just part of the PDMI's virtual education arsenal. That's because the PDMI's Workshop Council is also working on its new seasonal seminar series, the Winter Seminar Series, and it'll return for its first 60-minute webinar on January 26th. In addition, PDMI East Virtual, a 2-day, 8-webinar event replacing our previously planned in-person event, will take place on March 9th and 10th. More information on and your opportunity to register for these events is coming soon to your email inboxes and our website. Before we get to today's conversation, a quick housekeeping note. The group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send in your questions. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of this episode. Today, we're wrapping up a 3-episode series on the state of media with subscription pricing convergence. What does it mean? A look at how pricing hikes among BMVPDs and streaming services are narrowing the difference in cost between those outlets and for traditional paid TV services. I'd like to welcome our host, Christopher Foster, Vice President, New Business at Modern Postcard, a national direct marketing company that services businesses of all sizes and in all markets. Chris is Chair of the Brand Response Council. His guests today are longtime media expert and Brand Response Council stalwart Doug Bognar and Denira Borrero, Principal and COO of Miami-based agency Omni, which was recently listed among Adweek's fastest growing agencies. Denira is also a member of the PDMI's U.S. Hispanic Council. So thanks all for joining us. I'm going to toss a couple of notes here before Chris gets started, and note that in our newsletter today, we reported on some of the stuff that's going on in this space, including Viacom CBS making a deal with Hulu to add 14 networks to Hulu's their Plus Live TV product. Discovery Plus obviously going live on various streaming platforms recently. Big news for Roku, which Chris will get into. So there's a lot of action here early in 2021 in this space, and we're really excited to talk about it. Chris, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas, and Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome into 2021, and I'm really glad to talk about this with this fantastic panel. The topic really stems from the new proliferation of streaming services. We'd mentioned it before, where a handful of breakthroughs, and if you look back in time, you'll see these very large, kind of medium milestones to take place. I believe one of them was Disney Plus choosing to put Hamilton on in the summertime as a standalone content anchor or magnet, really, to pull people in. I also see what Disney's doing now with the Marvel series, where the integration of the Marvel series will integrate to the feature films. And so there's going to be a blending of content both on the big screen and on the home screen that I think is a harbinger of things to come. And so that leads to the concept of the streaming services, right? So today's announcement by Roku was pretty substantial. They have 50 million active accounts. They had a nice little, celebration about that. And they also note that nearly a third of American households no longer have traditional pay TV. So a consumer might be called a cord cutter, perhaps, but they're really a service splicer, where they pick and choose the platforms based on the content. Seems like there are over 300 streaming services available, from Netflix to Haya. It's not a question of consumers getting the content they want, but more about what they're willing to commit to each month and what content they want to see. The studies indicate the average consumer subscribes to about 3.4 services a month, maybe about $26 all in on an average, and you tack on the internet, so it's close to what a normal cable and internet package might be. So the question for the panelists is, where's the convergence? What does traditional cable look like in 5 years? Does it become niche? Does it cross over? Do you have more bundles, just like Disney and Hulu that Thomas was mentioning? Is that going to be the path forward, where streaming services want to connect and you get a bundle of all these various streaming services? Do they do those independently? Will consumers be able to subscribe maybe to an individual program? Can I just subscribe to the Queen's Gambit without actually subscribing to Netflix? So that's what the conversation is all about. Real excited to have these panelists. So Denira, I'm going to ask you first. Sure. So Netflix will probably continue to be allergic to selling ads. It's part of their value proposition, and they've started with that. And I think it'd be against their ethos and their brand promise if they started to sell ads. However, CBS Access sold ads in the beginning. So when I want to watch Star Trek Discovery, there's going to be some ads in there, and I'm aware of that when doing CBS. So my question for you is, how do you see new streaming services coming into play? Will they be forced to have advertising, or do you think they'll be more of a pure play and follow the Netflix model?
Well, a lot of that is market driven, right? So Netflix is a great service. It's what we call in the media buying side an SVOD, a subscription based video on demand. Um, and that's pretty much a category that grows with original content. And the reason why, you would go into a Netflix is because of that premium content. But as Netflix grows and grows, you'll see that they'll also need to, with the production of original content, they'll need to increase their prices as well, and then you'll see the market moving away from them. For example, what we see, especially during these economic times, on the media buying side, is that AVOD OTT is actually becoming more popular. That's advertising-based video on demand. Hulu is something like a hybrid of that, right? So they have live streaming and live broadcast channels that show advertising, and they sell advertising to the buyers as well. But it's also a subscription base, and I think what we're going to see is a little bit more of that going on, these hybrid types of OTT. And then I don't think, at least from a consumer perspective and on the media buying perspective, we haven't seen a reduction in TV viewing. The way in which people watch TV is different, whether they come in streaming or live or through the broadcast channels or through a cable or satellite may change, and the combination may change. But the actual viewership actually increased over 2020 because we were locked down, of course. So I don't see, your original question is the subscription-based companies like Netflix, and I guess Amazon Prime would fall into that as well. I see them as more of they're not going to be part of the cord cutting universe. They'll be a part of the cord stacking universe, right? Where you're not cutting the cord, you're just adding it to your cord. It's the AVOD OTT services that may move everybody to cutting the cord, where you're actually providing services that are advertising based. You're providing live viewing, and basically that's I see that as more of a movement for advertisers. In general, marketers are going to want to reach the viewers, right? So how do they reach them? As a media buyer, we were focused a lot on linear TV, and slowly we started testing OTT, and it's going towards the AVOD. There's nothing we can do with the Netflix and the Primes, and there's nothing they can do in terms of increasing revenue except for increasing their rates, their prices, and that's not sustainable either. So I do feel like it'll probably move into a hybrid universe, something like Hulu's and Slings and things like that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
No, that's a great answer. And what I love so much, Denira, is that you corrected my earlier phrase where I was calling, instead of a cord cutter, you're a service splicer. But actually, that's actually not true. So if you don't mind to borrow your term, you're a service stacker. The idea of stacking various subscription 3, 4, 5 different services a month, and that's actually your personal stack of media. That's a really interesting concept. I love it.
And I think that is going to be, that's market driven. That's what consumers are doing, and I think it's going to drive the providers to relook at their pricing models and how and what channels they provide.
Interesting. So I guess Douglas, I'll ask that of you. If there is you've got these Venn diagrams of these services that kind of overlap, and sometimes they don't, but if this emerging space of AVOD, which is this, I love it, Denira, this hybrid model of both advertising and subscription based on kind of what the content is. Douglas, what does that bode for traditional television in the next 5 years? What does linear television look like?
You know, cable companies are going to do what they always do best, and that's aggregate. They've got the box, right? And they're providing you, in most cases, your internet service. Kind of before I want to dig into that, if I may, Chris, to follow up
Hmm.
on Denira's comment about the services themselves, I think what you likely will see is that provider is going to offer 3 tiers of service: free, ad supported, and premium. And the premium will be ad free. The intent will be to pull you into their ecosystem, if you will. And I'm sorry that I use the word ecosystem. Uh, but that is, they want to get you in and keep you in. If it's your initial step to test, to dip in for content on the free side, because what's happening with the free services, it's all the same across all the providers. And it's the same archival free content, movies, television shows that are in the public domain that you can find pretty much anywhere. It used to be on channel 74, your broadcast station in your town, and now it's on, I don't know, Pluto or Philo or whomever. So, but getting back to your question to me directly about cable operators, cable's been, as Brian Roberts said a couple of months ago, indifferent to video for a number of years. They've been trading those dollars. It's not their primary source of revenue for 10, 12, maybe as long as 15 years. But what they do well is aggregate and bundle. And they have obviously an enormous opportunity with the subscribers that remain, and I think they're finally coming to grips with it. I think Comcast, shockingly, has been really great about it with their Flex service. So if you are a broadband subscriber, you get a Flex box for free. If you want additional boxes, they're, I think, $4 a month. So always got to pay for the box. But there's a lot of content on there, including live linear. And
Hmm.
then what they're doing, like all the other operators, is or like Roku and Prime and others, is allowing you to manage all your subscription services as well. So you
So
become I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, finish your thought.
Well, you just become dependent upon them again for
Hmm.
that service. And I will say that Flex recently, within the last month, made a change to their user interface, which I'm a Flex user, and it's terrible. They need to rethink that. They really buried the linear programs, but Comcast bought Zumo, so they've got 200 plus channels from Zumo. That again, they're just aggregating all of that content going forward. And not to be left out of this, it wasn't a part of your question. Consumer electronic manufacturers have a tremendous opportunity. The connected TV folks have a tremendous opportunity here. Um, let's not forget about TCL now providing an Android television as well as a Roku television. So if you don't want to have a set-top box from your cable operator,
Hmm.
uh, your TV will manage it just fine.
Just fine. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about managing subscriptions. You could imagine some almost like a Travelocity type of dashboard for all the variety of different streaming services that you could have based on the content they provide, and kind of mixing and matching and even setting your own menu of sorts of the kind of content that you want to watch, because it is truly now independent of the device. So we're on Apple TV, and Apple of course wants you to watch Apple original content, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that you watch on your Apple TV. And I would imagine that the new screens that are coming out, or devices, or television, television, just the flat screen TVs, are going to have all that built in. One
And
of the things,
universal search is such a key component here as well.
right,
If you're going
right.
to add aggregate, whatever device you're using for that has to be able to search across the various services out there to find you what you're looking for. Also
Hmm.
recommendations, all the
Hmm.
surfacing that takes place. I just think that Google, that's what they do, right? So when are we going to see them really step up here?
See, that's an interesting question, because you could imagine down the road why you it's not so hard to think that Google would even create their own original content the way
Of
Apple's
course.
doing it now. And about original content, Denira, I want to get back to what you had talked about earlier. I thought that was really interesting, where now Netflix is attracting more subscribers because of the original content you can only get on Netflix. And the pressure now is to create better original content that becomes stronger magnets for new subscribers. So that was an interesting idea where they might raise subscriptions by $1 a month. I mean, if I'm paying $9 a month, will I pay $10 a month? Of course. Well, if it's $10, if it's $1 per month for tens of millions of people, that's a lot of revenue for them. But me as consumer, that's fine. So in terms of the original content, do you think new streaming services will have to do that to stay competitive?
That's well, again, what attracts new subscribers is original content. And from an advertiser standpoint, what you are looking for is it's not just about impressions, right? It's about the quality of that impression. So for example, a cat video on YouTube is going to get a lot of impressions, but that's not necessarily what I would pay for, right? Versus a live NFL event or something, which could have similar impressions, but they're worth a lot more for me. So I think it's going to be a company, a service like Netflix will not go away. There's always going to be a demand for that. But by the same token, there's always going to be a demand for advertising-based content because of live events, because of what advertisers are willing to pay for. And they're willing to pay for that premium content. And premium content goes beyond the expensive production that Netflix provides. Premium content is a lot of live content too. Premium content is a lot of very current event type of content. And the broadcasts, the regular free TV broadcasters are not going to sit back and sit back with content development either. So it is going to be a continuation. I think the Netflix world won't go away, but from an advertising standpoint, they're not going to attract those dollars as much as the mass audience ones.
Yeah, it's interesting because you keep referring back to live content as this premium one-of-a-kind thing, because it's true. An NFL game only happens once, and no one wants to watch a game that they know the score of that happened 3 hours ago, because the drama is actually the mystery unfolding.
And the same goes for news. Same goes for news.
And same goes for news, right? And so you even wonder that is there a place where the type of content, if it's live content or specific event content, that goes off into a different place versus all the other pieces of content and subscription services.
Well, it goes back to what also Doug said. Is like the way in which they receive the content, technology-wise or through service providers, may change, but the demand for different types of content, it'll still be there pretty strongly. And there'll be demands for premium content, and there'll be demands for current events and local content and sports events, and advertisers will pay a premium for that current stuff, for the live stuff, for reaching a certain audience. The other audience that it has a very high disposable income is the older audience, the older demographic. There are a lot of advertisers trying to reach them, and for that, advertising-based video on demand, live linear TV is still the king. And so I think money drives a lot of that, and as long as the disposable income is on those distribution channels, I think they'll still stay alive for quite a while.
I think that's a great point, and kind of goes back to your question to me, Chris, about cable operators. Cable operators, the remaining subscribers are their highest value customers, and they're older, they're affluent, they have money to spend, they have disposable income. I would say the streaming services attract a lot of those same folks, by the way, as you said, stacking services. But the perception is that streaming services have this young, sexy, urban audience that is also affluent. I Haven't really seen the data on that, honestly, but I can tell you that's
Okay.
the way it works for cable right now.
Mm-hmm.
Cable operators are, I don't want to say just fine in the decline, but they are really distilling down to their most valuable consumer, and they're doing a lot of work finally to keep them.
And I,
Well,
I
you know,
think
and it
that's
could be.
absolutely right, Doug, because
Mm,
it shows up, because we buy performance-based media, and it shows up on the return on the media going out. Still is coming back to us with cable, and even though OTT is growing, it's not even close to what we see on cable. So I think you're very right in that the ones who have stayed are very valuable subscribers from an advertising standpoint, and they're the cream of the crop in terms of what advertisers are going after, who advertisers are going after.
Consider
yeah,
this
and
too. I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
no, what I was going to say is that what's interesting is that the demographic shift, everyone talks about Generation Z being the largest consumer group by 2026, but it doesn't mean that all the cable subscribers just vanish. They're still here and they still have
Yeah.
money to spend.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. And consider too that, say, for example, I'm one of the few remaining AT&T Uverse subscribers, but because of the package that I have access to CBS Viacom. I have I get Peacock free on my Flex device.
Mm-hmm.
I get HBO Max for free because of my Uverse subscription. I get ESPN via my Roku because of my Uverse subscription. So
Mm-hmm.
I've invested, $50 in a Roku and put it on my additional televisions. And basically, what I've done is it's $10 a month for a set-top box from Uverse. Well, I liquidate that cost of the Roku in 5 months, and I still
Sure.
have access to all of those
But
subscriptions.
and I have to say, from an advertising standpoint, you are a target, because the ones who are going to cut all cords are the ones that are coming out of college and don't want to pay for the cable.
That's right.
That's right. That's
Doug,
right.
he wants to see his sports, and
Or what happens, Denira, is that when they first start out and they first move to their first apartments, they don't even think about cable, right? All
That's
they
right.
need is internet because that's what they're used to.
Or they
Well, guys, we
watch
could
right here.
That's right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we could talk about this all day. You are
Mhm.
fantastic and knowledgeable, but we're already at 11:25, close to it.
Oh, wow.
So what I'd love to do is I'd love to have Thomas open up the door and let some questions in for you fine folks.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. A great conversation. Couple of interesting questions. A couple of the first ones actually kind of band together. So one was about your prediction about how many streaming services the average consumer will onboard in a service stacking universe, and it was then put another way by somebody else saying, what do you believe the ceiling for streaming subscriptions is for consumers? Any thoughts on an average or a ceiling of total subscriptions?
I think that ceiling is really the great question there, Tom, because remember, you're dipping in and out of these services. For the most part, you're not buying an annual contract. You're paying for a month, and I think the strategy for the services really comes into play here if you are providing content on an episodic basis or it's a dump. Because when Stranger Things comes out, you can dip in, buy a month of Netflix, watch all the episodes in a 1-day marathon or whatever, then you're out.
Right.
So I think HBO Max, first thing that AT&T has done correctly in terms of their streaming strategy and tactic was to, say we're going to release the 1984 Wonder Woman
Wonder Woman.
1984 on Christmas Eve, or on Christmas Day rather, and say, hey, all of our movies are going to be here first. You're going to stick around as a subscriber. So I don't think the ceiling is probably, I'm going to say, and this is just guesstimate, 5 or 6, and I'm not counting, and I'm counting subscription services, not the free,
not the free stuff, right?
Yeah, not the free stuff.
Yeah, I know COVID had a lot to do with the stacking this year, so it'd be interesting to see how that changes as we move out of the pandemic. universe, which I'm not sure when is going to happen. But we did some a similar webinar for PDMI in this summer on OTT on the Hispanic world, and I think at that point we were coming out of lockdown, and there was an average of 3 additional services
Right.
through just the 3-month lockdown. So I
Yeah.
mean, you have to know what's going on in the world to see, whether or not people are going to stay home watching streaming services. But I think that's a lot to do with it too. The economic environment, and I hope we never get another pandemic, but it definitely affected the onboarding of stacking.
Interesting.
Interesting for sure. One more before we go. This one more on the lines of the TV manufacturers, and I think, Doug, you talked about this, although you have a Roku box. I can speak to it from having bought a Roku TV or Roku activated TV. The involvement of TV manufacturers with Roku and other platforms, how is that going to change the direction of all this, to expand the opportunities for all of these streamers?
Yeah, I definitely believe so. I think it's just another point of that, the ability to aggregate, manage, surface, and discover different content. The Vizios and the Samsungs of the world seem much more open, at least from my experience so far, than the subscription services to particularly shopping networks and direct-to-consumer offerings. So yeah, I think that that's a tremendous opportunity. Do I think they're managing it well right now? No, to be honest with you. They've taken some strides, but that is a tremendous opportunity going forward, and they just need to execute on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a question where, and we've seen this now. I think one of the hallmark and seminal events in this mix is the advent of the iPhone, where the technology changes consumer behavior and expectations.
Absolutely.
So if the technology comes first and consumers change and move that around, people are kind of catching up to that. I think that now, if I'm someone like Sony Electronics, right? We've got a big corporate headquarters here in San Diego. They're like, oh my gosh, we have to make a television now for all these streaming services. If they saw that last year, well, they still have to make the darn thing. They've got to design it. We've got to make it and manufacture it. It's going to take some time, right? So I think that as they're looking at it too, and they're like, oh gosh, do we invest all into a really smart screen that handles all of your subscriptions? Well, what if the landscape changes 18 months from now, which it could, right? So I think that if I'm electronic manufacturer, you can make a bet on that, but still it's still a bet, right? It's not a sure thing because, Denira, to your point, just in the pandemic, if I added 3 more services, I could add services, drop services. Does a smart device have to have all new streaming services available, 300 plus, if some come in and some come out? If Haya comes on and then they are just repurposing old martial arts movies and they don't set original content, and I'm a user and I've watched all the movies, right? I'm out,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
So I think it's a really interesting play where to the electronic piece of it, the hardware piece of it, I think is always going to be a laggard. It has to be based on consumer behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely agree. They work on an annual basis in the development of the sets, so you're 12 months behind the curve.
Right. And the curve's changing all the time.
Changed, yeah, every minute.
All right, so that Doug, not Doug, but Thomas, are there any more questions for Doug or Denira?
I think that should do. We probably should wrap it up. We're come up on a half hour, so I'm sure there's a lot more questions.
It's a take 30, not a take 20.
Yeah, right. We have to change the name of this thing. But no, I think wonderful conversation, folks. Obviously, for any of our attendees, if we want to get in touch with any of the panelists today, just drop a line and we'll connect you. Otherwise, thank you, Chris, Doug, Denira, for your time. We really appreciate it. Your next opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 is on Wednesday, January 20th, 2 weeks from today. as a group of Brand Response Council members presents a special episode titled Your 2020 in 7 Words or Less. This is a kind of an adjunct to a piece in our December issue of Results Magazine where this group kind of tackled the same topic, but we'll hear from them live and in person. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to check out the upcoming schedule and register to attend today. Thanks for checking out today's episode. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the work week. Stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
Tom.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.